experience in PU and UG teaching. She has 5 books, book chapters, and articles in journals and magazines to her credit, of which the most noted is Digital Kranti Mattu Bharata. She's an excellent science communicator on topics that concern general public and has appeared on news and television shows. Advocating for science over pseudoscience, she has actively participated and encouraged all the initiative of PVJ Science. Ma'am, I would like you to speak some words about PVJ Science. Thank you.
ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಬಹಳ ವಿಶೇಷವಾದ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಸೇರಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಜರ್ನಲಿಸಮ್ ಅದರ ಒಂದು ಕಾರ್ಯಾಗಾರ, ವರ್ಕ್ಶಾಪ್. ನಾನು ತುಂಬ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಸಮಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಇದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಹೇಳಬೇಕಾಗಿದೆ. ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಜರ್ನಲಿಸಮ್ ಬೇಕೇ ಬೇಡವೆ ಅನ್ನೋದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಈಗಾಗಲೇ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ನಮ್ಮ ನಿರಂಜನ ಆರಾಧ್ಯ ಅವರು ಈಗಾಗಲೇ ಹೇಳಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಒಂದು ಲೀನಿಯರ್ ಆಗಿ ಹೇಳೋದಾದರೆ ಸೈಂಟಿಫಿಕ್ ಲಿಟ್ರಸಿ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಬೇಕು. Scientific literacy among the masses, among the population, irrespective of art, science, commerce graduate or even any education. So for every individual needs a little bit of scientific literacy in order to participate in the bigger projects of the country and to understand what the country is doing. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಬೇಕಾಗಿದೆ. ಸೈಂಟಿಫಿಕ್ ಲಿಟ್ರಸಿಯನ್ನು ಅಚೀವ್ ಮಾಡುವ ಒಂದು ವಿಧಾನ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಕೇಷನ್. ನಮಗೆ ಓದ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಕೆ ಬಂದಾಗ ಅದು ಬೇಕಾಗಿಲ್ಲ, ಆದರೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಸಂದರ್ಭಗಳಲ್ಲೂ ಅದು ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಎಜುಕೇಷನ್ ಲಿಟ್ರಸಿ ಪರ್ಸೆಂಟೇಜೇ 68-70 ರೇಂಜು. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಪಾಪ್ಯುಲೇಷನ್ನು ಇನ್ನೂ ತುಂಬ ಕಡಿಮೆ. ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಓದಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥವರು PUC ಮೇಲ್ಪಟ್ಟು ಅಂದರೆ ತುಂಬ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಆದಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಪರ್ಸೆಂಟೇಜು. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಸೈಂಟಿಫಿಕ್ ಲಿಟ್ರಸಿಯನ್ನು ಅಚೀವ್ ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ, ಅದನ್ನು ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನ ಸಂವಹನೆ ಬೇಕೇ ಬೇಕು. ಈ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನವನ್ನು ಸಂವಹಿಸಬೇಕು ಅಂದರೆ ಸಂವಹನಕಾರರು ಬೇಕು. ಸಂವಹಿಸುವ ವಿಧಾನಗಳಲ್ಲಿ, ಹಲವು ವಿಧಾನಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಜರ್ನಲಿಸಮ್ ತುಂಬ ಪ್ರಮುಖವಾದಂಥ ವಿಧಾನ. ಪತ್ರಿಕೋದ್ಯಮದ ಮೂಲಕ. ಪತ್ರಿಕೋದ್ಯಮ ಅನ್ನುವುದು ಹಿಂದೆಗಡೆ ಪತ್ರಿಕೆಗೆ ಸೀಮಿತವಾದಂಥ ಒಂದು ಪದವಾಗಿದ್ದರೂ ಇವತ್ತು ಜರ್ನಲಿಸಮ್ ಪದದ ಆಯಾಮ ತುಂಬ ದೊಡ್ಡದಾದಂತಹ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಹರಡಿಕೊಂಡಿದೆ. ಬಹಳ ವಿಸ್ತೃತವಾಗಿ ಹಲವು ದಿಕ್ಕುಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಜರ್ನಲಿಸಮ್ ಹರಡಿಕೊಂಡಿದೆ. ಈ ದಿಕ್ಕುಗಳು ಯಾವ್ಯಾವುದು ಅನ್ನುವುದನ್ನು ಎಲ್ಲ ಸೆಷನ್ಗಳಲ್ಲೂ ನೀವು ಪಾರ್ಟಿಸಿಪೇಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಒಂದೊಂದು ದಿಕ್ಕನ್ನು ತೋರಿಸ್ಕೊಡ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಒಂದೊಂದು ಸೆಷನ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಮ್ಮ ರಿಸೋರ್ಸ್ ಪರ್ಸನ್ಸು ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಹೋಗ್ತಾರೆ. ಈಗ ಸೊ ಇಂಥ ಒಂದು ಅಗತ್ಯದ ಸನ್ನಿವೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಜರ್ನಲಿಸಮ್ ವರ್ಕ್ಶಾಪಲ್ಲಿ ಚೇಂಜಿಂಗ್ ಚಾಲೆಂಜಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಕೇಷನ್ ಈ ವಿಚಾರದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ HR ಕೃಷ್ಣಮೂರ್ತಿಯವರು ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ HR ಕೃಷ್ಣಮೂರ್ತಿಯವರು ನಮ್ಮವರೇ, ಅಂದರೆ ನ್ಯಾಷನಲ್ ಕಾಲೇಜಿನ ಹಿರಿಯ ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿ. ಅನಂತರ ಬಹಳ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಅವರು ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಕೇಷನನ್ನು ತುಂಬ ಚಿಕ್ಕ ವಯಸ್ಸಿನಿಂದ ಪ್ರಾಕ್ಟೀಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಬಂದಂಥವ್ರು. ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಜ್ಞಾನ ವೇದಿಕೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಲೆಕ್ಚರ್ ಕಾಂಪಿಟೇಷನ್ಸ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇತ್ತು. ಆ ಲೆಕ್ಚರ್ ಕಾಂಪಿಟೇಷನ್ನ ಉದ್ದೇಶ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಕೇಷನ್ನೇ. ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಕೇಟರ್ಸ್ನ ತಯಾರು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂದರೆ ಅದಕ್ಕೊಂದು ಸ್ಪರ್ಧೆ ಬೇಕಾಗಿತ್ತು, ಲೆಕ್ಚರ್ ಕಾಂಪಿಟೇಷನ್. ಅವರು ತುಂಬ ಪ್ರಮುಖವಾಗಿ ಅವರ ಒಂದು ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ಪ್ರಾರಂಭಿಕ ದಿನಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಲೇಸರ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡಿದ್ದೆ ಅಂತ ಅಲ್ವಾ ಸರ್? ಆ ಕಾಂಪಿಟೇಷನ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು ಲೇಸರ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಪ್ರಥಮ ಬಹುಮಾನವನ್ನು ಗಳಿಸಿರ್ತಾರೆ. ಅದು ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್. ಅನಂತರದ ದಿನಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು ಆಕಾಶವಾಣಿಗೆ ಕೆಲಸಕ್ಕೆ ಸೇರಿಕೊಂಡ ಮೇಲೆ ಆಕಾಶವಾಣಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಮುಖ ಅಂಗವಾಗಿ ಬೆಳೆಯುವುದಕ್ಕೆ HR ಕೃಷ್ಣಮೂರ್ತಿಯವರು ತುಂಬ ಒಳ್ಳೆಯ ಕೆಲಸಗಳನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನಕ್ಕೆ ಸ್ಲಾಟ್ ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ, ಡಿಫೈನ್ಡ್ ಸ್ಲಾಟ್ ಅಂತ ಏನು ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ ಅದಿರಲಿಲ್ಲ. ವಿಜ್ಞಾನ ಮುನ್ನಡೆ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮವನ್ನು ತಂದವರು HR ಕೃಷ್ಣಮೂರ್ತಿಯವರು. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಸೂಕ್ತರಾದಂಥವ್ರನ್ನ ಪ್ರತಿಷ್ಠಾಪಿಸಿ ಅವರನ್ನು ನರ್ಚರ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದು ಕೂಡ HR ಕೃಷ್ಣಮೂರ್ತಿಯವರು. ಸುಮಂಗಳ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಮೆಂಟರಿಂಗ್ ಮಾಡಿ ನರ್ಚರ್ ಮಾಡಿದವರು. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಬೆಳೀತಾ ವೃತ್ತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಬೆಳೀತಾ ಪ್ರವೃತ್ತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂಡ ಅವರು ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಟ್ರೆಕ್ಕಿಂಗ್ಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ತಾರೆ. ಪರಿಸರ ಪ್ರೇಮಿ, ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳನ್ನು ಪರಿಸರದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮತ್ತು ಇನ್ನಿತರ ಚಟುವಟಿಕೆಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಕೂಡ ಬರಿತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವರ ವಿಸ್ತೃತವಾದ ಚಟುವಟಿಕೆ ಮತ್ತು ಕ್ವಾಲಿಟಿ ರೈಟಿಂಗನ್ನು ಗಮನಿಸಿ ರಾಷ್ಟ್ರಮಟ್ಟದ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನ ಸಂವಹನಕಾರರಿಗೆ ಇರತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಪ್ರಶಸ್ತಿಯನ್ನು ಪಡೆದ ಮೊದಲಿಗರುಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಎಚ್ ಆರ್ ಕೃಷ್ಣಮೂರ್ತಿಯವರು ಪ್ರಮುಖರು. ಇಟ್ ನೀಡ್ಸ್ ಯುವರ್ ಅಪ್ಲಾಡ್. ಜ್ಞಾನಪೀಠ ಪ್ರಶಸ್ತಿ ಹೇಗೆ ಇದೆಯೋ ಆ ಥರ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನ ಸಂವಹನೆಗೆ ಇರುವ ಪ್ರಶಸ್ತಿಗಳಲ್ಲಿ 9 ಜನಕ್ಕೆ ಸಿಕ್ಕಿದೆ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನ ಸಂವಹನೆ ಪ್ರಶಸ್ತಿ. ಎಚ್ ಆರ್ ಕೃಷ್ಣಮೂರ್ತಿಯವರು ನಮ್ಮ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕದಲ್ಲಿ 9 ಜನಕ್ಕೆ ಸಿಕ್ಕಿರೋದು ಬಹಳ ದೊಡ್ಡದು. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಎಚ್ ಆರ್ ಕೃಷ್ಣಮೂರ್ತಿಯವರು ಪ್ರಾರಂಭದ ದಿನಗಳಲ್ಲೇ ಪಡೆದಂಥವ್ರು. ಇವರು ಕನ್ನಡ ಪುಸ್ತಕ ಪ್ರಾಧಿಕಾರ, ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನ ಪರಿಷತ್ತು, ನವಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕೇಶನ್ಸು ಹೀಗೆ ಅನೇಕ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ತಮ್ಮ ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳನ್ನು ಬರೆದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅನೇಕ ಯೋಜನೆಗಳನ್ನು ಜಾರಿಗೆ ತಂದು ಅವು ಸಕ್ಸಸ್ಫುಲ್ ಆಗುವಲ್ಲಿ, ಯಶಸ್ವಿ ಆಗುವಲ್ಲಿ ದುಡಿದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅದು ತುಂಬ ಪ್ರಮುಖವಾದ್ದು. ಅಡ್ಮಿನಿಸ್ಟ್ರೇಷನಲ್ಲಿ ಇದ್ದಾಗ ಯೋಜನೆಗಳನ್ನು, ಹೊಸ ಹೊಸ ಯೋಜನೆಗಳನ್ನು ರೂಪಿಸಿ ಅದು ಯಶಸ್ವಿಯಾಗುವಂತೆ ನೋಡಿಕೊಳ್ಳೋದಿದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಅದು ಸಾಮಾನ್ಯವಾದ ಸಾಧನೆ ಅಲ್ಲ. ನಾವು ಕೂತ್ಕೊಂಡು ಪುಸ್ತಕ ಬರೆಯೋದು ಸುಲಭದ ಕೆಲಸ, ಓದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಬರೆದ್ಬಿಡ್ಬೋದು. ಆದರೆ ಹಲವು ಸ್ತರಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಿಸಿ ಯಶಸ್ವಿ ಮಾಡುವಂತಹ ಸಾರ್ವಜನಿಕ ಯೋಜನೆಗಳು ತುಂಬ ಕಷ್ಟ. ಅಂಥ ಹಲವು ಸಾರ್ವಜನಿಕ ಯೋಜನೆಗಳನ್ನು ಆಕಾಶವಾಣಿಯ ಮುಖಾಂತರ ತಮ್ಮ ಕಾಲದಲ್ಲಿ ನಿರೂಪಿಸಿದಂಥವರು ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಎಚ್ ಆರ್ ಕೃಷ್ಣಮೂರ್ತಿಯವರು. ಇವೆಲ್ಲ ಸಾಧನೆಗಳನ್ನು ಗಮನಿಸಿ ಹಲವು ರಾಜ್ಯ ಮತ್ತು ರಾಷ್ಟ್ರಮಟ್ಟದ ಪ್ರಶಸ್ತಿಗಳು ಇವರನ್ನು ಅರಸಿ ಬಂದಿದ್ದರೂ ಸಹ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಟೆಕ್ನಾಲಜಿ ಅಕಾಡೆಮಿಯವರು ಕೊಡ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಲೈಫ್ ಟೈಮ್ ಅಚೀವ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಅವಾರ್ಡ್ ಇವರಿಗೆ ದಕ್ಕಿದೆ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರಕ್ಕೆ ಸಂದಿರುವ ಸೇವೆಗಾಗಿ. ನಾವು ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಕ್ಕೆ ಕೇಳಿಕೊಂಡಾಗ ಬಿ ಜಗದೀಶ್ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಸೆಂಟರ್ ಅವರು ಬಹಳ ಸಂತೋಷವಾಗಿ ಒಪ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇದು ಯಾಕಂತಂದರೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಈ ಎಲ್ಲ ಚಟುವಟಿಕೆಗಳನ್ನು ಅವರು ತುಂಬ ಪ್ರೀತಿಸೋದ್ರಿಂದ ನಾವು ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡೋದು ಏನಾನ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಬರದೇ ಹೆಸರು ಎಚ್ ಆರ್ ಕೃಷ್ಣಮೂರ್ತಿ ಅವ್ರದ್ದು HSN, ಇಲ್ಲಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಎಲ್ಲ ಮಹನೀಯರುಗಳದ್ದೇ ಯೋಚನೆ ಬರ್ತದೆ. ಅವರು ಕೂಡ ತುಂಬ ಪ್ರೀತಿಯಿಂದ ಒಪ್ಪಿಕೊಂಡು 3 ದಿವಸಗಳಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮದಲ್ಲಿ ಪಾರ್ಟಿಸಿಪೇಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿರೋದು ಬಹಳ ದೊಡ್ಡ ವಿಷಯ. ಸರ್, ತಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಕ್ಕೆ ಕಾಲೇಜಿನ ಪರವಾಗಿ, ಬಿ ವಿ ಜಗದೀಶ್ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಸೆಂಟರ್ನ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಮತ್ತು ಇಲ್ಲಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಎಲ್ಲರ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಹೃತ್ಪೂರ್ವಕವಾಗಿ ಸ್ವಾಗತಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ ಸರ್. ಇನ್ನು ಈ ಒಂದು ಸೆಷನ್ಗೆ ಬಂದಿರತಕ್ಕಂಥ ನಿಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರನ್ನೂ ಸಹ ಹೃತ್ಪೂರ್ವಕವಾಗಿ ಸ್ವಾಗತಿಸಿ ವೇದಿಕೆಯನ್ನು ಚಾಲೆಂಜಿಂಗ್ ಚೇಂಜಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಕೇಷನ್ ಎಂಬ ವಿಷಯದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತನಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಎಚ್ ಆರ್ ಕೃಷ್ಣಮೂರ್ತಿ ಅವರಿಗೆ ತೆರವುಗೊಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಧನ್ಯವಾದ.
This one? Okay. Dr. Kamala, my long-time friend and the chairperson of this session, and my very close friends in the auditorium, and my dear students. Do you have any objection if I do it completely in English? Because I know that some people don't understand Kannada. Let us see. Let us see how it proceeds. During the morning session, we had a very interesting presentation by Dr. Aradhya, my 5 decades friend. In a way, I propose to continue from where he has stopped and discuss about the changing challenges of science communication. But after coming to the stage, I realized that one more greater challenge than the communicating science communication, challenges in the science communication. That is to keep all of you awake during the session. After the sizzling heat outside and a good lunch, now it's a very cool environment. Now, to keep you awake is a greater challenge, and I'll try to do what I can do. I would like to start this session with a slightly peculiar slide. You may wonder what Ganesha is doing in this scientific session. It is definitely not to invoke the blessing of God Ganesha for the smooth running of the session. That is not my intention. My intention is totally different. The very next slide will show you why I am using this particular slide. Now, you see these slides here. It is the same Lord Ganapati. People or devotees are trying to feed Ganapati with milk. This is supposed to be one of the greatest miracle of milk. It's called a milk miracle in India. This happened in 1995, to be precise, on 1995, September 21st. Most of the young students, you were not born. But it so happened on that morning, news broke out that in Delhi that Lord Ganesha is drinking milk. If you offer milk in a spoon, take it near the trunk, it used to vanish, and it started in Delhi. And by about afternoon, the news had spread throughout the country. You remember 1995, at the time we did not have the internet, and your WhatsApp was not there, the modern means of communication was not there. In spite of all this, by about afternoon, the news spread like wildfire, including Bangalore. The fourth block Ganesha temple, you could see a long queue of people all carrying milk, the milk can, and trying to offer milk to the Lord Ganesha. It became, by about afternoon, in fact, the very next, I'll show you the next line, the BBC said India has come to a standstill. Bombay and Delhi stock exchanges, which are the most busiest stock exchanges in our country, they closed down the trading in the afternoon to enable people to go to the temple to offer milk to Lord Ganapati. All these are the same, some of those slides. Now the point is, how many of you really believe this? How many believe? Whether you believe or not, Times of India conducted a survey the very day in Delhi, Calcutta, and Bombay. 60% of the people believed, yes, Lord Ganapati was drinking milk. Now, this was the conclusion. Now, this was it was precisely for this reason it was called the milk miracle. The entire country came to a standstill. Not only in India, wherever you had the Lord Ganapati idol, elsewhere in the world, all those places, the same thing happened. And the people believed, yes, Lord Ganapati was drinking milk. I will not go into the details. India is a slightly peculiar country. On one extreme of the spectrum, we have tremendous achievement, tremendous feats of science and technology, whether it is space, or whether it is information technology, biotechnology, what have you, medicine, agriculture. We have extraordinary achievements on one end of the spectrum. On the other end, we find people who are steeped in, not only people, even a large number of scientists are also steeped in this kind of superstition. Take a look at this. Now, this was the same news which was carried by BBC, which said that India has come to a standstill. This was some of the coverages which was done throughout the world, all focusing on India for bad reasons. Take a look at this. This was Dr. Niranjana Raja referred to this. During COVID, now this was the practice. You take cow dung, mix it with water, convert into cloud dung slurry, you take bath. Here, see, two people are taking bath in a cloud. Now, this also started. On one hand, there were efforts to come up with the vaccine at the fastest rate. On the other hand, you also had the people like this who used to take cow dung bath. Take a look at this. This is not connected with One day, much earlier, a crow came and sat on CM's vehicle. Siddaramaiah was the chief minister, and it came and sat on the vehicle. The whole day, one of our news channels carried out a discussion, carried out an interview with a person. The effect is, what is the effect of crow sitting on the car? Whether CM is going to lose this one. The crow is not bothered. Siddaramaiah is a very rational person. He is also not bothered. But look at this one. The entire day was devoted to this one. Now, I have worked as Doordarshan, as director of Doordarshan Chennai, one of the largest Doordarshan center. The time is so precious, you don't get time. But here is a channel which spent a whole day calling him, and for about 7 continuous hours, they discussed what would happen to CM because the crow has come and sat on his vehicle. They tried their best to take it out, but it would not go, and it continued. Forget about those things. Look at this. This was in 2019 Indian Science Congress. This was in Punjab. It's a lovely professional university held in Punjab. Indian Science Congress is an August gathering of the top scientists of not only our country, but invited from the other countries also. Now, in this session, one of the Vice Chancellor of Andhra Pradesh University, stationed at Vizag, now he presented a paper. He presented a paper which made all mysterious claims. He said Kauravas were born due to stem cell and test tube technologies, something which Niranjana Aradhya referred. Then, for example, Ravana had 22 different types of aircraft, and there were airports also in Sri Lanka. Theoretical physics, including contributions of Newton and Einstein, they're totally wrong. There is a need to re-look at their work. Now, this was in the Indian Science Congress on the last day, made by the Vice Chancellor. He is a chemical scientist. He is a well-known chemical scientist. But of course, subsequently, there are a lot of protests. Youngsters, like students like you, look at the other side. Time to speak up for science. They said they protested. Protesters were held throughout the country. And now, what has happened is, for once, all the scientists also who were there, they protested this. And now, the next Science Congress is going to take place on January 23. Now, they have already said nothing of that type should happen, and there should be no opportunity for people who are going to make such claims. This is the one. Now, I would straight away move to the question, what does a science journalist do? Suppose you join as after completing your education. If you are interested, if you join, what does the science journal basically do? Now, the first thing is, a science journalist is a link between science and the general public, or the scientist and the general public. He bridges the gap between the science and the society. Now, his job is basically to look at the various developments that are taking place in the field of science and technology and report that to the general public. It is not just reporting. It is the process of simplifying. You will have to simplify, you will have to analyze. More than anything else, how exactly the scientific development is going to impact the society, impact the common man. Now, if you are able to communicate what is the effect of that particular development on the society and the people, if you are able to link, now you would succeed as a science journalist. In addition to that one, promoting scientific thinking and the scientific literacy, maybe I'll have something to say about a later point of stage. Now, these are basically the work of a science journalist, and you are expected to do these kind of activities. Now, some of us started the science journalism activities in the science popularization activity way back in mid-75s. Myself, Aruna is there, Niranjana Aradhya is there. We were all, so we started nearly about 50 years back. Now, when we started, the kind of challenges we had was something totally different from the kind of challenges we have now. So I'll just run through some of the challenges. One of the greatest challenges we faced then was the acute paucity of information. We never got the required information from the scientists or the scientific institutions. Around 75, we had about 45 scientific institutions in Bangalore, research establishment and the scientific institutions. It was very difficult to get information from the institute. As of now, you have the website. For example, those days, These institutions did not have their website, and the scientists would not, the moment you say you are a science journalist, they would walk away. Because they were afraid that you may misinterpret what they have done. Therefore, they would not communicate with you at all. And even when you ask, even when you want them to come to your studios or you go them, they would refrain from talking to you at all. So the information was not forthcoming at all. We used to try so much to get information. The only way was, whenever they find something very interesting, they used to have a press conference or they used to give a press note. Now we were eagerly waiting, take that press note. But after taking the press note, if you want to talk to the scientist, get some clarification, that was not possible. So that was the kind of atmosphere where in fact, Nagesh Hegde, when you speaks tomorrow, he will tell you his experience also, because all of us are started working at the same time. They would not allow you, they would not share the information with you. This was the kind of... Then the secondary source of information for us was the scientific magazines. For example, Science Reporter and Science Today. For those days, it was extraordinary publication. We used to get a lot of information. Now, it was a monthly publication. We used to get those and bound them and keep it as our reference safely in the library. There was no Google. Now, those were the very treasured information source for us. We used to keep. It was good. But once again, we had the same problem. So, for example, I read an article on genetic engineering, let us say. Now, I would like to talk to the particular person and ask some clarification. There was no way of doing that one. Second point was, the information that was contained in those publications were quite old. For example, today, if I want some information, what is happening this morning, I can get it. You know how to get that information. But it was not there in the 1975. That was the paucity of information was one of the greatest challenges. Then the limited number of popular science magazines, etc. Then the shortage of science communicators. That was the time, as I said, scientists, very few scientists would talk to you. Therefore, we had good science communicators and good scientists, we used to get them. But otherwise, it was very difficult. We very heavily dependent on the university lecturers, the college lecturers, editors of some of the science magazines, and the encyclopedia, people who write for science encyclopedia. We used to always hunt for them and try to get them. Now, that was also a challenge, yes, but we very systematically worked and we were able to do that one. Then the next problem was, particularly if you are trying to do science coverage in the regional language, the technical terms in the regional language was also a problem. Not that the technical terms were not there, technical terms was there, but uniformity was not there. If I am a science writer, I will use a particular science term. If you are a science writer, you would do different. In the bracket, you put what exactly that means in English. Now, that was not, but fortunately, I don't want to go into what happened during the 50 years. Fortunately, we had very committed people in all the scientific organizations and the universities at that time. In Indian Institute of Science, we had ISRO, we were in touch with ISRO, the National Aeronautical, all these scientific institutions, we had a handful of people. They were very devoted to promote and popularize science. Now, we used to talk to them, gather the information, and even these technical terms also. Mysore University did wonderful work for them. And Navakarnataka brought out several publications. Karnataka Rajya Vijnana Parishad, of which Niranjana Aradhya was the president, they brought out the scientific discovery. Now, it was a very hard way of meeting those challenges. We met all those challenges. Today, none of this, whatever I have listed, none of this is a challenge today. We have overcome all the challenges. Now, if we have overcome all the challenges, then we are posed with the next set of challenges. Then what are the current challenges today? Now, I will make it very, very precise. There are four, in fact, my only aim is to cover these four. There are four current challenges today. The first one is what we call the models in science communication. Now, what do I mean by models in science communication? Model is basically a method, a philosophy, which we use in order to put on the information, put the information across to the public. What exactly is the method? What exactly is the philosophy behind the model? And what is the method of putting this one? Now, what we use is, in the model, there are 3 different models we use for science communication. One is called the dissemination model, dialogue model, and the participation model. All the 3 models work simultaneously. Let me come to the dissemination model. The first model is, it's called the science deficiency model, this one. Models in science communication. We call it as the deficiency model. So this deficiency model works like this. See, public have the information, but the information that is available with the public is not sufficient. Therefore, as science communicator, you gather the information, put across the information, therefore the deficiency is made good. Now, once the deficiency is made good, public will use that particular information in order to improve the quality of their life. Let me give you a very simple example. 2021 March, Covishield came. It's a very quick development. The first vaccine against this Covishield came. But the problem was, even though Covishield came and the government announced that they are going to start the vaccination program, people were not ready. If you look at some of the figures, see, there are several vaccination centers where the people would not go at all. They run away. They would not go into the vaccination center to get themselves vaccinated. Why? That was because of the simple reason people did not know how exactly this Covishield vaccine works, whether it is safe, what would be the after effect. This information was not there. This is the information deficiency. Now, that was the time when the science communicators, the doctors, and the professionals, they came out and they went on giving the information to the public. Therefore, that deficiency was slightly made. And then people, by about August, people started coming into the vaccination center. They started. This is exactly how the deficiency model works. But unfortunately, this deficiency model it doesn't work so easily. Even when you provide the information to the public will not readily accept that information, and your information is transformed into the action. How many of you drive a two-wheeler? Yeah, quite a good number. Okay. We have one organization called Petroleum Conservation Research Association, PCRA. Now, every year, they bring out a number of advocacy material informing the public how you should drive the vehicle, when you should change the gear, and at what speed you must drive. And more than anything else, if you are at a signal, for more than 1 minute, you switch off the signal. But how many of us do it? We have all the information. That information could be very easily translated into action, but we don't do it. Now, why does this happen? Even when you provide the information that is okay, that is required for the public to improve the quality of that, why people do not readily accept and use that particular information? So for that one, you need to, science will not, in fact, physics or chemistry will not give you the answer. You need to go to psychology. How exactly the information is transformed into the action? This is very essential for a science communicator, for a science journalist. It is not sufficient if you give out the information. You must know the information which you have provided, how exactly it finds its path, finally results in the action. For example, I go on giving the information. This is exactly what happened in case of Covishield. Covishield, they went on giving the information. You take it, it is safe, etc., etc., etc. Now, once you start bombarding the public with information, when you continuously expose the public with information, that results in awareness. The first step is it generates the awareness. Awareness will not lead to action. This awareness must be validated. How it is validated? For example, vaccination. You asked your friend, did you take the vaccination? He said, yes. Is there any harm? No, it works very well. Absolutely, there is no problem. Now, there is a small validation is there. The awareness, then the individual will look for the validating that particular information. Now, once the information is validated, you are confident, particularly if some of your relatives, some of your very close friends say, for example, you purchase a mobile, you want to purchase a mobile, you don't ask your parents, You ask your friend, hengide adu anta. First class agide tago anta helta, then you go for that one, that validation. So that awareness must be validated, then validation will then lead to implementation. You implement, you analyze, now you are convinced, either you are convinced or you are not convinced. If you are, that is the reinforcement. The awareness, you analyze, this analysis will reinforce that particular information. Now, once that is reinforced, you become the source of disseminating the information. You start disseminating the information. Therefore, in science communication, if you want a particular message to be used by the people, implemented by the people, you must not stop at just disseminating the information. You must validate it. Find out somebody who has already used this. Talk to them, get that information, that gets validated. Then it comes to. So a science communicator must not only disseminate information, if awareness, validation, implementation, the whole lot of this process, at every stage of the process, a science communicator must work with his client, either it is the public or whether it is the newspaper readers, radio. So a science communicator has an additional responsibility. The other two models, I said, I just spoke about the dialogue model. This is a slight improved version where actually you talk to the dissemination model, you only put across the information. Dialogue model, you talk to the people, you take their opinion. And in the third model, it is a participation model. This is very important. This participation model particularly works in cases where, for example, in cases like agriculture. Here, it is not the scientist who has developed. Now, it is the farmer working in the field, the progressive farmer. He has come up with a particular solution. Scientists work with them. So participatory process is adopted. Then you put across the information. Such a kind of information has a greater, it will create a greater impact. But the point is, all these three models work together, and you need to be aware of this model. The second important challenge that we face is doubt, creating doubts in the minds of the people. Now, this is a strategy usually adopted by the business houses. Now, all of you know that doubt is fundamental to the scientific method. Only when there is a doubt, you question. Only when there is a question, skepticism is there, and that leads to a questioning, and then you get the information, analyze the information. If the question is not there, questioning is not there, there is no advancement of science at all. It's very good. This doubt is a very legitimate tool for the scientific advancement, agreed. But when the doubt is used in a different way, in an inappropriate way, that can cause a lot of damage, and this is exactly a number of media houses and the number of scientific institutions are also doing that one. Then I'll take a very simple example. Take, for example, Araja referred to climate change and the global warming. See, climate change and global warming are two phenomena, interconnected phenomena, about which there is no doubt at all. It is happening. We are experiencing the effects of these two. And as I said, the polar ice is melting, the sea level is rising. If you look at the IPCC report, it is going to impact even the people at Mangalore, Udupi, etc. They are going to be affected in another 15 to 20 years. All this is there. But 2 years back, when Donald Trump stood for the election, he said there is nothing like global warming. There is nothing like global warming. There is nothing like climate change. They're all making of the people. You are doing it. There is nothing. That's why he withdrew from the Paris Agreement also. Now, what is the reason? This decision was backed by one of the largest oil manufacturer, ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil is the largest manufacturer. So if all the countries accept that there is global warming, then what is the next step? You need to reduce the fossil fuel. If you reduce the production of the fossil fuel, these companies are going to be affected. Therefore, ExxonMobil, what it did, it spent millions of dollars on research. It had the scientists, these scientists we call are the committed scientists. What is the commitment? Even before you start the research, you know what is the result you are getting. So that particular research, you orient entire your activity in order to get that result. We call it as cherry picking of data. You see, how is the cherry picking done? ಆ್ಯಪಲ್ ಪಿಕ್ಕಿಂಗ್ ಅಂದ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಣ ನಾವು, ಸರಿ ಬೇಡ. ನಿಮ್ಮನ್ನೊಂದು ಗಾರ್ಡನ್ ಬಿಟ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಒಂದು ಆ್ಯಪಲ್ನ ಪಿಕ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಅಂದರೆ ಯು ಓನ್ಲಿ ಪಿಕ್ ಅಪ್ ದ ರೈಪ್ ಆ್ಯಪಲ್ ವಿಚ್ ಯು ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಯೂಸ್. ಸೊ ವೆನ್ ಯು ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಎ ಲಾರ್ಜ್ ಅಮೌಂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಡಾಟಾ, these scientists will pick up only such data which will reinforce what you want to get as the final result. This is the situation. This happens day in and day out. I am speaking about climate, global warming and climate change. This happens in the case of cigarette and cancer. This happens in the case of there are several other examples of genetic modification of food. All these areas, when you have two results, if you are a business interest, if you are with a business interest, you pick up only that data that will promote your business and suppress this one. As science communicators, we must be extremely wary of this one. You must be in a position to handle this. What is the real intention? It is a doubt deliberately created by the business houses, or it is something else. Now, that you must be very careful about that one. Now, the next challenge we face in science communication today is the overabundance of information. You see, when we started, I said that we did not have any information at all. The paucity of information was the greatest problem. But today, there is an information explosion. You get lots and lots of information. Kamala was discussing that I spoke in Science Forum contest on laser. I remember that was in 1966. Laser was invented in 1960. So 1966, I wanted to speak on laser. So we started searching for the information. Believe me, for 2 months we have searched for the laser and it was not available at all. Because 60 was the time when it was developed. 66 was the time, now before that particular time, it did not find itself into the textbook. Hardly any magazine carried the article, only Science Today carried the article. I still remember my physics professor, out of frustration, he said, you go, there is a film running in Imperial Theatre, there the Bond's movie. A Bond uses a laser, you look at that laser. Now this was the suggestion that was given to us. But today, you spend 15 minutes on the net, you get minimum of 15,000 entries related to this one. This is the information explosion. While the information explosion is okay, you get another challenge. That is the challenge of quantity versus quality. Most of us believe, at least some of us, most of the general population believe that whatever you get in Google is okay, it is reliable. That is the ultimate truth. No, it is not true at all. That is only the first point of your search. Now, after that particular search, you need to do a lot of this thing to check up the veracity. How authentic is that particular information? So, as a future science journalist, now you need to differentiate. You need to differentiate what is truth from the hype, what is real from the fake, what is trustworthy from misleading. This is an extremely important task for a journalist, particularly a science journalist, how exactly you are going to do this. Now we will look at that one. So we need to sift and sort the information you have. You have lots of information, and how do you process that information and come at, how do you do that now? The first thing I do as a student of science communication is I'll search the source. Where exactly this information is coming from? Now, if this information is coming from ISRO headquarters, or if this information is coming from Indian Institute of Science or the National Aerospace Laboratory, yeah, then I'm satisfied. Why I'm satisfied is I can always go back and check that. Second one is what is the reputation of the information? Reputation of this particular source. If all the three of which I mentioned are highly reputed, therefore reputation is okay. But for example, if I get some information about some unheard of scientific institution, obviously I don't believe that one. The third point is, who is the author of this information? Where exactly, from whom, which particular laboratory and which particular scientist this information has come from? That I need to check. Then I check whether there are any biases. Then I'll show you the next example. Whether in this particular scientific discovery, whether there are any biases idya, or are there any vested interest. I also need to check up. The most important point is verifiable. Can I go back to the source and check up whether it is true? Can I talk to the scientist or the public relation officer of that particular, whatever the institution? Is the information verifiable? If the information is verifiable, yes, you go ahead, do it one. Then, if there is a particular discovery, there are half a dozen different laboratories around the world or in Bangalore. They are also working on the same this one. Now, what do the other sources say? Do the other sources contradict this? Or the other sources support this? What is the stand taken by the other institution? So you need to check the source, the reputation, the author, the biases, vested interest, verifiable, supported by other sources. Very quickly, we will apply this to one of the discoveries. I mean, all of you know this one, okay? Now, who is this person? Huh? Yeah, you know, you know Baba Ramdev as a yoga expert, but what you must also know, he sits over a pharmaceutical company of 3,000 crores. And if you walk into any of the shop and ask for a Patanjali Yogapita, this one, you get lots and lots of product on there. You become very fair by using a cream within 1 week, or diabetes. Corona also, even before the vaccination came, they brought out some drug, which are not accepted. And this is the situation. Now, this institution, Patanjali Yogapita of Haridwar, it was in 2007. I was still in service. 2007, one fine day, they said, we have discovered the Sanjeevani. We have discovered the Sanjeevani Mulike. And if you don't know Ramayana, you will not be able to understand. The Sanjeevani, you remember, during the fight between Ravana and Rama, Lakshmana gets injured and he passes on to the coma. Then Hanuman is sent on a machine to bring that particular Sanjeevani Mulike. Sanjeevani Mulike, which those places have been identified, Sanjeevani Mulike, and use that one to cure. And Lakshmana comes back from coma after the use of this particular, what is called the Mrit Sanjeevani. Now, for the past 30 years, scientists are trying to identify this. I trying to identify this particular plant. And on one hand, there is a very systematic scientific work which is going on in Bangalore under Dr. K.N. Ganeshaya's stewardship. On the other hand, in 2007, all of a sudden, one fine day, they said, yes, we have discovered. Now you apply in the previous slide, whatever we have. So first one is source, whether the source is a reliable source, and I don't like to answer that one, it's a big question mark. Now the next one is reputation. Number of court cases are there. A large number of court cases are there against Vidyapeeta. The third point was verifiable. Who exactly discovered this? He said 2 Ayurvedic doctors went to Himalaya and discovered this. Who are those doctors? Can we talk to them? The scientific community asked, the scientific journal asked, can we talk to them? No, you can't talk to them. It is not possible. All right. What is the methodology you adopted in order to pinpoint that this particular one, this is Sasuria gassififora, this particular plant was this one? That methodology we cannot disclose. Then can it bring back the people from coma? Have you actually tried it? No, we are going to try it. The greatest fun was they claimed that they have submitted the plant for a patent in India. Now, if you submit a patent, the patent application is in the public domain. I can always, there are 4 offices. The nearest office is for me with Chennai. Now, the moment you submit a patent application, the details will come. At least essential details of that. So, science journalists searched all the 4 patent offices. There was no patent application at all. But the funniest part of it is, in India, you cannot patent a plant. These people said that Sanjeevani, we have applied for a patent. For a patent, for a plant, you don't get a patent. If you have a product, yes, you can apply. So, for example, if I want tulsi, I can't get a patent for tulsi. If there are a medicinal product out of which one, then I can apply for a patent. So, if you apply the previous criteria of checking the source, the author, the authenticity, reputation, verifiability, etc., it fails. So this claim was totally, but of course, for about a year it made a lot of noise, and there were several people who believed it, but scientifically it was not proved at all. Then I come to the last one. This one is what we call the false impartiality or the false balance. This is something which is very, very rampant, particularly in the TV channels, not in Doordarshan, the private TV channel. This is very, very rampant. Now, what is this false impartiality? See, impartiality, fairness, and balance, they are the pillars of journalism. Now, you need to have impartiality, you need to have fairness. But when the weight of scientific evidence points in one direction, if you bring the other person also, then that is exactly, it's called the false balance. Look at this particular one. Now, they are discussing about the solar system. They are discussing about the solar system, and you know the structure of the solar system. You also know that Earth is round, it goes around in almost a circular orbit. But you want to balance. He is going to express some opinion, you want to. So, in order to balance, we have invited a member from a flat Earth society. So there are people who believe that the Earth is flat, very, very small, insignificant population. And the evidence is, incontrovertible evidence is there in order to prove it is here. But at the same time, in the name of balancing, you invite people who don't know anything, who don't have any evidence, but you want to balance and you get them. Now, this is repeatedly happening, we are fighting this. This is repeatedly happening in the TV channels. On one hand, you see, then I remember Nataraj is not there, Professor Nataraj is not there. I'm sure he will be monitoring this sitting in America. You see, he participated in one discussion. I still remember the discussion. That was, you see, one asteroid was coming millions of kilometers. It was passing somewhere. And these people thought that, it is coming closer to the Earth. They had a discussion. And Nataraj was, as a student of science and a physics professor, he was also participating in that one. Nataraj had all the evidences and he had collected all the information, evidence, etc. He wants to present. But the others said, now you had an astrologer who had read something about this one. And during one point of time in the discussion, astrologer said, do you know, Professor Nataraj, I have visited 72 countries. This was the kind of, so Nataraj said, so what? Now, because I have visited 72 countries, they invite me, my voice must carry some value, nothing of that type. Now, this we do, particularly the red moon, then these eclipses, effect of the eclipses. This is exactly what this private channel does. On one hand, you get very eminent scientists. On the other hand, people who only know how to draw your leg. That is all. Now, this thing is something, in the name of balancing, we should never do it. I think I'm going to stop at this one. I know if there are questions, I will. But in essence, what you must remember is, compared to the last 50 years, most of the challenges science communicators have met. The nature and complexion of the challenges today are totally different. Now, if you are interested in science communicating or if you are interested in science journalism, now you need to acquire the skill and the methodology to counter these challenges and face these challenges. I'm sure I have given you some material for thinking and you will appropriately use that particular material. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, I will take. Otherwise, Actually, you see, what I have done, what I have done is I have painted the broader picture of these particular challenges. Tomorrow's sessions, is a down-to-earth session where how exactly you become science journalist, what you do, etc. Tomorrow is the more a practical session. I'm saying you are going to get the input from that one. And also the next, Manasi is going to particular one session. Now that will tell you the exact ways of handling this. This is more of a theoretical framework which I have provided, okay?
Like subject experts and leg pulling culture. ಅದನ್ನು ನ್ಯಾಷನಲ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ರೀಜ್ನಲ್ ಚಾನೆಲ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ಆಗೋದನ್ನು ಒಂದು ಕಂಪ್ಯಾರಿಟಿವ್ ಆಗಿ ಒಂದು ನೋಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ದಟ್ ಟೈಪ್ ಆಫ್ ಕಲ್ಚರ್ ಈಸ್ ಬಿಟ್ ಕಂಪ್ಯಾರಿಟಿವ್ಲಿ ಲೆಸ್ ಇನ್ ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷ್ ಮೀಡಿಯಾ ದ್ಯಾನ್ ರೀಜ್ನಲ್ ಅನಿಸುತ್ತೆ.
You see, the problem is, so far as the government media are concerned, whether it is Doordarshan or Akashvani, we have a very strong science policy. In fact, I had the opportunity of framing the science policy in the radio. One advantage in the government media is at no point of time we allow the broadcast of this particular time. Now, we are not bothered about the revenue. We are not bothered about the audienceship. But we make it a point that we never communicate any unscientific information. And this is true of all the radio stations throughout the country and all the Doordarshan throughout the country. We very strongly, we owe our allegiance to the Constitution and the necessity to develop the scientific temper. We don't do it. But unfortunately, as Bhaskar Rao pointed out this morning, Nitya Bhavishya is how the revenue comes down. They do it. They are not bothered about it at all. In fact, one of the anchor publicly says that we know that it is unscientific, but we can't stop it. And if you don't broadcast this, we don't get the revenue and we don't get that is the kind of situation. Therefore, what we do is, as a scientist, when you get an opportunity to participate, you must participate in the program and make your voice heard. It may be a very lone voice, but you must make your, in fact, I remember Dr. Kamala participating in one of the discussion. The anchor went on triggering several, but she stood to her, that was a lone voice. The others were, I believe some of them were astrologers. But so when you have the knowledge, when you participate, they will definitely, once you are a science journalist, you are invited to participate or you invited to make your point heard or bring your point, whatever you want to say. Don't hesitate at all. Don't hesitate and step back. But all India Radio Doordarshan, we don't go by that one at all. It is basically the private channel because it is tagged on with revenue generation. They do this one. But fortunately, even then, they will invite. They will try to balance to a certain extent. And we must seize upon that balancing opportunity to put across our idea. Okay? Yes, sir.
ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಟುಡೇ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ರಿಪೋರ್ಟರ್ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾಗೆ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನ ಲೇಖನಗಳಿಗೆ ಮೀಸಲಾದಂಥ ಮಾಸಿಕಗಳು ತುಂಬ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಈ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ. ಮತ್ತು ದಿನಪತ್ರಿಕೆಗಳಲ್ಲೂ ವಿಶೇಷ ಸಂಚಿಕೆ ಅಥವಾ ಪುರವಣಿ ಅಂತ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನಕ್ಕೆ ಸೀಮಿತ ಆಗಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು ತುಂಬಾ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಇದೆ. ಈ ಹಿನ್ನೆಲೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಜರ್ನಲಿಸ್ಟ್ ಹೆಚ್ಚಾಗೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಮತ್ತು ಓದುಗರು ಹೆಚ್ಚಾಗೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಒಂದು ದೊಡ್ಡ ತೊಡಕಾಗಿದೆ ಅಂತ ನನ್ನ ಭಾವನೆ. ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ತಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರತಿಕ್ರಿಯೆ ಕೇಳ್ತೀನಿ.
ನಾನು ಐ ಡೋಂಟ್ ಕಂಪ್ಲೀಟ್ಲಿ ಅಗ್ರಿ ವಿತ್ ಯು Aradhyan. ಯಾಕೆಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ, you see, when we started for about 50 years back, when the science communication efforts were started in the media, we never had staff exclusively devoted to take care of the science reporting. But fortunately, we have today. And even if you do not know science, and even if, for example, after your graduation, etc., you join a press, for example, the Patrikodyamakke ನೀವು entry ಕೊಟ್ಟರೆ, you, over a period of time, you develop your own. For example, you can become a sports journalist, or if you are interested in science, you can become a science journalist. ಇವತ್ತು ನಾ ಪೊಸಿಷನ್ ಇದೆ. There were efforts to bring out exclusive. For example, Bangalore University used to bring out Vijnana. Now Academy is bringing out exclusive. Karnataka Rajya Vijnana Parishad, you have Bala Vijnana, you are bringing out. But the problem is, you don't, if you look at the readership, the number of literature, that is very, very limited. It is only in such cases the government need to come to the help of the people. And if you want really, newspaper situation is far, far better today. All the major newspapers, they carry the supplement. And particularly, you see, one advantage of newspaper is, and we were discussing about this false impartiality. Newspaper never does that. For example, you take Prajavani. Prajavani, once in a month, you get the opposing views. Both the views are exactly, it is evidence-based and written very well. It doesn't happen in this one. Therefore, efforts are there. The number is gradually increasing, but only unfortunately, it is not in proportion to what we expect them to be. Yella paper the situation is far more better. In fact, as we were discussing in the morning, there was a time when scientific development never made it to the cover page. ಯಾವುದೇ ಪರ್ಟಿಕ್ಯುಲರ್ ಡೆವಲಪ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಆಗಲಿ ಆ ಡೆವಲಪ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಯಾವುದೋ ಒಂದು ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇತ್ತು, ಯಾವುದು 3rd ಪೇಜಲ್ಲೋ 4th ಪೇಜಲ್ಲೋ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇತ್ತು. ಐ ಸ್ಟಿಲ್ ರಿಮೆಂಬರ್ ವಿ ವರ್ ಸ್ಟೂಡೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಇನ್ 1969. 1969 when Neil Armstrong landed on moon, Deccan Herald brought out an evening special issue. ಅವತ್ತಿನ ಸಾಯಂಕಾಲ they brought out one particular special issue. Now ಈ ರೀತಿಯ ಸ್ಪೆಷಲ್ ಇಶ್ಯೂಗಳು ಅಕೇಶನಲಿ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, and you get, but the situation is not completely happy. There is a need for increasing, and youngsters like you then definitely can contribute in that particular field. Yes.
ಈ ಸೆಷನ್ ತುಂಬ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಅನ್ನಿಸ್ತಿದೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ, ಆ್ಯಸ್ ಎ ಪ್ರಾಕ್ಟೀಷನರ್ ಐ ಡೀಲ್ ವಿತ್ ಸ್ಟೂಡೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಲೈಕ್ ದಿಸ್. ಇವ್ರಿಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮಿಗೆ ಬರಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಅಥವಾ ಮಲ್ಟಿಮೀಡಿಯಾ ಅಪ್ರೋಚಿಗೆ ತೊಗೋಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಒಂದು ಸಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟಾದಮೇಲೆ ಇಮಿಡಿಯೇಟ್ಲಿ ಐ ಆಸ್ಕ್ ದೆಮ್, ನೀವು ಹೇಗೆ ಇದನ್ನು ಪ್ರಿಪೇರ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋತೀರಾ, ಇಂಟ್ರೋ ಏನು ಕೊಡ್ತೀರಾ ಅಂತ. ಸೊ ಆ ಥರ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಒಂದು ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೀರಿಯನ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ಇವರು ವಿ ಜರ್ನಲಿಸ್ಟ್ ಜಾಕ್ ಆಫ್ ಆಲ್. ಇಂಟ್ರೋ ಕೊಡಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ವೆದರ್ ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಪ್ರಿಂಟ್ ಆರ್ ಎಲೆಕ್ಟ್ರಾನಿಕ್ ಮೀಡಿಯಾ, ಆ ಪ್ರಿಪ್ರೇಷನ್ ಎಲ್ಲೋ ಒಂಚೂರು ಕಡಿಮೆ ಆಗಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಅನ್ನಿಸ್ತು ಸರ್. ತುಂಬ ಇನ್ಫಾರ್ಮೇಷನ್ ನಾನಂತೂ ಜಾಟ್ ಡೌನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋತಾ ಇದ್ದೆ, ಬಟ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ ದೇರ್ ಪಾಯಿಂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ವ್ಯೂ ಅದೊಂದು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಹೌ ಟು ಎಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ನ್ಯೂಸ್, ಹೌ ಟು ಎಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಇನ್ಫಾರ್ಮೇಷನ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ ದ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪರ್ಟ್ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಅನ್ನಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆ.
ಓಕೆ, ರೈಟ್. ಐ ವಿಲ್ ಆನ್ಸರ್. I very briefly answer your question. You see, first thing is you need to, for example, even tomorrow's exercise, you need to select a particular topic. Now, how do you select a particular topic? The topic which you choose must be relevant to the society, relevant to your immediate need. For example, if there is a development, if there is scientific development yesterday, if it is, now you need to collect that information and link. This linkage is extremely important. Unless you link the development to our life, now people are not going to listen to you at all. People are not going to listen to you, people will not read it at all. Therefore, the first one is you must be very choosy about what you are going to write. Don't write on something which is happening in Antarctica. That you can, that's a different. So what is happening, for example, if you take Bangalore, what exactly is happening in Bangalore? Now what is relevant, what is happening in that particular field? You select that particular information. Now, whatever the source you select the information, that information will not be sufficient at all. So you must select get the information at least from half a dozen sources. So Google is a starting point. Google is a starting point to collect the information. When Google, when you, for example, you read an article in Google, let us say. Now, don't be satisfied with that article. You go to the, there will a large number of references are there. If it's an interesting article, half a dozen references are there at the end of the article. All of them are accessible. Now, those references will contain a lot of information. It will tell you about the information, it will tell you how exactly the information has particularly developed. Now you have a large set of information, you are sure about the authenticity of the information, and you are sure about the facts that is given in that particular information. Then how exactly you put it across? How do you put it across into a format? For example, it could be a written this thing, or it could be a video this thing, as Mansi is going to show you. Now, this portion of it, Nagesh Hegde will tell you tomorrow, because I don't want to into that one. How exactly you become a journalist. So, collecting the information from one source, it is not at all advisable. Collect the information from half a dozen sources, check up the veracity, and put it across in a manner, this comes by practice, put it across in a manner, how you start an article, how you start a particular program, and what is the information. And another tendency is, you have collected the information, you want to load your article or your program with all the information. Never do it. Don't try to put all the information in one, let's say, one two-page article. It's not possible. So what you can do is, out of the information which you have collected, pick one or 2 points which are interesting, which arises the curiosity of the listener, build on that one, then leave it at that one. End it with the question, let them, the wonder is there, this wonder is the essence of science communication. You create a sense of wonder, try to explain that one. And don't try to load your write-up with all the information that you have. People will not have the patience to go through that information, okay?
ಒಂದು ಕಾಫಿ ಸರ್ ಬನ್ನಿ ಕೂತ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ. ಒಂದೇ ಸಿಂಗಲ್ ಕುರ್ಚಿ ಹಾಕಿ. We have the next session, ways of communicating science to Indian audience. It is a very interesting topic. That means there is different methods to communicate for different set of audience. So this will be delivered by Mr. S Chaitra. We once met in a channel. Okay. Mr. Chaitra started his academic life as an ecologist and molecular geneticist after his master's in zoology. He worked with Wildlife Institute of India, Dehradun, Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, and many more institutes. He studied specifically genetics, behavior, and ecology of different organisms in India with a special focus on the Western Ghats. This is of interest. During his doctoral work, he studied the patterns of distribution of rare and endemic organisms both in space and in time. From the past 8 years, he has shifted his focus from natural sciences to study Indian traditions. He now coordinates a group of young PhD students who work in developing scientific hypotheses on Indian traditions. Currently, he serves as a member of Kuvempu Bhasha Bharati, Government of Karnataka, and he is also non-official member of National Biodiversity Authority, Government of India. Mr. Chaitra is also a very good communicator, and he writes, and he is also on many channels and other media. So today he'll be speaking on ways of communicating science to Indian audience. We welcome him on behalf of all of us here. Over to Mr. Chaitra. Please, sir.
Thank you very much for all the distinguished speakers earlier. Some of the seniors whom I have seen and I have heard Krishnamurthy sir, I have read his books in Kannada. I was born and brought up in a small village, Kannada medium student till 10th standard. So naturally, of course, at the time when he was doing his serious science journalism, I was not even born. So pardon me, because that's the kind of experiential differences. So what he can deliver, I cannot certainly deliver. But looking at the excitement that some of us have with science, the way the science has drawn us, has transformed our life. So I thought I will bring some of the issues that are very interesting and challenging for anybody who is interested in science in India. Now there are two aspects. One is doing science, and another one is communicating science. The question would be, doing science one can understand for various reasons, that someone wants to be a scientist, someone has a particular kind of a project, someone wants to sort of address, specific kind of a given developmental policy or theoretical issue for which he would require to be part of a laboratory, some kind of a field survey and address it. There are methods, theories, etc. Is one way that you could look at the life of science. But there are a large number of people, in last 1 century in India, who have passionately dedicated their lives in communicating science. And there is a very legitimate reason why people engage in thinking about science. And I wanted to begin my journey from there, and I keep moving between science and science communication, and then try to sketch what I think are our challenges that we should focus on. And I have termed the title Ways, not Way, because I think, see, when you are in a forest which is unknown, quite a virgin forest which you really don't know where to go, one has to really find ways, to make it usable, walkable. In that way, science communication in India needs to explore multiple ways of communicating it. Why, how, where, etc. is something that we should explore at a very fundamental level. I am not denying anything that has been said so far in terms of media problem, politics, the commercial interests, vested interest. All these things are legitimate problems. They are the most pressing problems that we have today, insofar as science communication is concerned. But there are also some deeper issues other than along with these issues that we need to point to. And that is what I wanted to sort of bring it to your attention today. And if I am successful, even partly communicate what I wanted to put across, I think the whole purpose is served, and then it will sort of lead to some kind of interesting conversation. Now, if you look at today's scenario, there is nothing, the participants here who are sitting, there will be nothing unusual in my description. For various reasons today, that everyone wants to use science. In the sense, for example, as he has pointed out rightly, that there are various companies are saying people find, thorium in Vedas, to embryonic sciences in Quran, to, any number of reasons. And even, for example, the Maoists who are waging war against the state of India would say that we have the most scientific, democratic model. To a range of arguments that you see. In public policy discussions, the bureaucrats would say, politicians, for example, who have no concerns for any of these would say, there is a scientific way of doing things. So, in some sense, if you look at this conversation, prima facie, you will see that there is some kind of a primacy value to science that has been assigned. Now, everyone wanted to legitimize their claim. Everyone wanted to justify their actions or claims or arguments by invoking science. Now, there are also serious people who would disagree with some of these concerns, with rightly so. And when they talk about science, you must also realize not all of them carry a unified version of what constitutes science. Therefore, what makes some knowledge into scientific knowledge is something which is normally, most often in any milieu of the science conversation, is quite general and vague. And there is a lot of elements which are unclear. When 10 people sit and talk about this, what is science? Now, it is very difficult to say whether all of them agree on one view of science or not. And it is, technically speaking, to use very complicated terminology, epistemologically, or in terms of its analysis of knowledge, it's very difficult to say what exactly would constitute science. But nonetheless, all of us realize that science is fundamentally very, very, very important in our lives. Whether, look at, I don't know how many of you know from my generation where I came from the village, look at the transformation in our daily life. Or, to put it in a single word, the standard of living that we have today. Now, there were days in the village, 1984 in my village, first time we saw a bus coming to our village. 1986, we saw electricity in our village. Now, before that, there was no electricity. And some of us who used to go out of the village and come to Bangalore as children, and we had come to Bangalore, Bangalore had electricity. So we had seen electricity. Technology started coming and entering our life. From the fuel wood-based stove to, gas to electric unit to, all kinds of innovations have come. In that sense, whether we like or not, whether we invite it or not, technology, for good and bad reasons, has entered our life. For example, a large number of people today cannot sit and talk comfortably precisely because technology has entered our life. You have smartphones. I mean, we had enough luxury in our life. Even in my college, I never had a smartphone in my college. Forget about smartphone. There was no mobile phone. I mean, till 2000, our village didn't have a landline connection. So, in that sense, we had this luxury of spending time and talking to people. That's one part. There is another part. There is fascinating things that science has brought out. The kind of medical intervention, the kind of equipments that we have, the electricity, the automotives that are available today, is something, has made our life so comfortable. The standard of living has enormously changed. In this situation, therefore, one of the very important social responsibility for any responsible citizen in this world is to say, how do we orient science for betterment of people? What appears to be most reasonable thing for people? How do we orient science and technology in such a way that people make use of it and be happy in this world? So in order to do that, one must be told what is the nature of using science and how should science be. Then you come back to the first question that I have told you, that it brings you back to this question of what really constitutes science. Now, if you look at the way historians and philosophers of science have looked at science, now there are half a dozen broad perspectives which would actually tell us what could be science is. That's unimportant at this point in time to talk about how last 300 years of history of science, people have analyzed it, thought about it. Now, the definitions and how, what kind of models of science are the most appropriate one, how many models, etc., what would that lead to science, etc. But one of the simple things that you would know today, you would all agree that science is something like cognitive enterprise. In other words, science is something which could be legitimately called as best form of knowledge that is available to us. Now, whatever comes through this process of scientific investigation comes out and available to you will be the best form of knowledge that you could use, develop it further, remodify it, put it to reuse, transform it. In that sense, one could ask this question, where does science really exist then? If science is in the form of some books, by reading, Origin of Species, would you become an evolutionary biologist? No, it is not in sentences, it is not in books, it is not in laboratories. Of course, laboratories are very necessary, books are very necessary, sentences are very necessary, but none of them contain science. Science is combination of these things plus something. Therefore, you could simply put it, to make the argument very simple, science is a particular way in which you understand, look, think about the phenomena that you encounter in the world. You could possibly see science itself directs you, to orient you to think about something of this kind. Now, when such a science, which is so valuable, which has transformed our life, so much in last, at least 2 centuries have been dramatic modifications in our life, the kind of change that have happened. Generations have become very shorter. Earlier, when people used to call generation gap, it used to be 3 generation, 4 generation. Now generation gaps come in just the matter of 10 years. If you look at anthropologists, sociologists talking about Gen X, Gen Z, now they talk about. Now, millennials, and then Gen X and Gen Z. And so in the meantime, by the time before I came to this terminology, I didn't even know that, I don't understand. 10 people who were born just 10 years after me, I really don't understand. And one of the most fundamental transformation of this kind, these attitude towards life, etc., has happened precisely because of the transformation that has happened in science. because it has given you a lot of things in your hand. A lot of things have become handy. What was considered impossible 100 years back are possible today. There are a large number of things which are not even a speculative possibility a century back today are not just the speculative possibility, they are doable in this world. Nobody would have imagined that people would land on moon. Nobody would have imagined that we would have a mission to reach Mangala. All these things are possible today, which was unthinkable. They were not even speculative possibility. Not even a century back, if you go back, it is not even part of a science fiction. And suddenly, in less than a century, they are realities of this world. Now, in that sense, the science as a way of thinking, as a way of looking at world, in order to look at that way, bringing transformation in terms of material, in terms of ideas, is enormous, which the human history has never witnessed. This kind of transformation has never happened. Now, the challenge lies is that if this is the kind of change that has been brought, we are all affected by it. Before, some of the science communicators in Canada, I'm familiar with large number of discussion that we need to create scientific vocabulary in Canada, standardized. Krishnamurthy sir was talking about it. Now, before we could even create that, today science has entered. See, for example, today smartphones have come. Pressure cooker is there in every house. Before we could think of even creating a terminology in Canada to talk about these things, they are already there in use. That is the kind of speed at which, there is a rocket speed at which these changes have been happening in our world. Now, question, if this is the case, one could ask this question. If you hear the narration that I gave you right now for some time, this narration would compel you to think that science is changing in every part of the world in the same way. Now, is it the case that the impact of science has its impact in the same way in every corner of the world? The answer is no. The question is why is that the answer is no. I'm not getting into these differences of saying someone is rich, someone is poor, etc. This is not the kind of difference. But there is at a very fundamental level of difference that is there. And this difference, something that I was very ignorant till few years back. And one of our professors at Indian Institute of Science wrote an unusual paper. His name is Anirban Rai Chaudhary. He was a physicist. And he wrote a very interesting paper, doing Western science outside the West. Some reflections on personal experience. This was a paper which appeared in a journal called Social Studies in Science. Now, what does he do in that? Now, he was a Bengali, studied typically, like all of us, studied in Bengali medium, and then at high school level came to English medium, who was one of the very high-performing, scoring students, and goes to Chicago for pursuit of his theoretical physics in Chicago, and comes back to India as a faculty. So he had this richer experience of studying in colleges, universities in India, then goes to Chicago and does his serious scientific engagement in the university and various institutions, and comes back to Indian Institute of Science, and there is another different way of practicing science in India. And he, out of his experience, vast experience that he had, spent 3 decades plus in thinking about science, he was raising this question: why is that we Indians, now whether you're a Kashmiri, or a Tamilian, or a Kannadiga, or a Bengali, for some, out of his experience, he was trying to ask this question, that why is that we are not able to perform in science the way in which the Europeans and Americans could do? And he was formulating his problem in a very interesting way. He's saying it's not just the problem of Indians, it is also the problem of the Chinese and Japanese. There is some kind of a problem in the way that we do science when compared to them. This is the first level problem that he characterizes. And the second level problem that he characterizes is that, see, look, I have learned serious physics. I have read all the reference material, that is required to do a good physics till my master degree, and as a project assistant in some projects, he has picked up everything. But I go to Chicago, spend 3 years, and suddenly there is something that happens to me in the way I do science changes. I become dramatically different kind of a scientific person when compared to what I used to be here. Now, this is a very fundamental question that it comes to. he asked this question, is there any problem with the teachers, the way they were teaching science? No, he doesn't see it as because they were very committed teachers teaching him. Not that every teacher was committed, but there are a large number of teachers who were very serious teaching physics. They were going out of their way to help these guys out. They were putting their efforts, everything. But there is something which is fundamentally different, which makes you to learn science, not just because they're a university or teaching or anything else, but there is something which is significantly different, which brings into the life of a person who is passionate about science. Now, what could be the kind of difference that these universities and institutions in the world brings into a scientist, which is not otherwise available to the people, whether they are in Indian Institute of Science or somewhere else? I mean, this is the broadly way he looks at this problem. And one of the things that he recognizes is the science fundamentally, any knowledge production for that matter, unlike a large number of literary scholars who think that individuals, great geniuses can produce. He doesn't deny that scientists will be a genius, etc. One may or may not agree. I mean, that's not a problem. But it is fundamentally, science is fundamentally a community enterprise. It's an enterprise where a group of people had to come and they become team player and they have to work together. So therefore, the significant difference in the way in which the Western science, from where what you call the modern natural sciences have emerged, that he is using as a model when he refers to science. These modern natural sciences have emerged in a particular cultural context within which there is a particular way in which science is being done. So the transmission of how to be a scientist, what it means to do a scientist is there is some kind of a common sense element. There is some kind of a vocabulary that is available for them to talk and pick them very easily, for which no doubt Indians can learn. Science can be learned by anybody. I mean, anybody who wants to learn would get it, but you have to put in more effort. So one of the very striking features that he brings in is that the development of science requires a particular kind of a context. It requires a particular kind of a background situation within which a community of scholars can live, talk to each other, develop relationship with each other, through which the knowledge is produced. And therefore, knowledge gets also transmitted, over a period of time. Now, this actually leads us to another consequence of what he was saying, which he talks in this paper, which I think is very interesting and significant, is saying that because that there are differences in culture and the way the sciences have evolved over 300 years now, 300 plus years in the Europe, and the way other cultures are different, there is some kind of an incompatibility. Because all of us, whether we like, whether we dislike, are product of particular kind of socialization in different cultures. We have particular way of being in this world, particular way of doing things in this world, particular way in which we understand people, relate to people. And these differences of socialization that we have in this world, apparently, he finds, as a physicist, has an impact on thinking about it. Now, after Anirban Rai Chaudhuri, a large number of people have looked at this point, and in fact, there is a larger discussion that exists today in something called social studies of science today, where people talk about there is social epistemology. There is some background condition within which we must recognize that we are telling the stories of science. Now, I took this digression of the experience of a scientist to bring you back to this point, is that when we become the science communicator, one of our orientation, fundamental orientation is that, look, there is the purest form of the knowledge that we have. People in science have developed, sat in laboratory, thought about it. They did whatever that is required. They used appropriate tools and methods, etc. They used appropriate criterions of validating it, verifying it. They made it reproducible. They made it repeatable. All these features that you ascribe to science are part of the story that you have. They are there. And this science can be told to people for what? To reorient a particular way in which you look at the world. Because science is changing your ways of looking at world. An analysis. Science is not simply a set of junk information which, as Krishnamurthy sir was pointing out, I mean, if you want to give information, I mean, information is available. I mean, if you want to be a little careful, you can find out which is the legitimate information or not. But the question is, the communication of science as a fundamental goal is, it tells you, it orients people towards certain way of looking at, certain sophisticated way of thinking about this world, which is expected to transform your lives. Not just one's life, but a social surrounding within which you live. Now, because one life alone cannot be transformed, if you are transforming, obviously your transformation has a spillover effect on the others. It would obviously impact the people who are in surroundings, so it brings in some kind of change in this world. Now, one of the key issue that haunts all of us today is that when we want to write a journalistic story about the rocket or something else that we are considering, or maybe Covishield, Covaxin as the Indian vaccines that are available in the market, etc., is that we assume that it is as clean as possible that we simply take it in English or put it in simple English or put it in Kannada or Tamil or one of these languages and tell these people, and people would absorb this story. Most often the answer is, which he was rightly pointing out, the answer is that no, they don't. The question would be, one set he had already answered, that there is a way in which people process information, and that is true for whether it is scientific or not. Any information, whether you want to go and buy a jewelry in a jewelry shop, also follows the model that Krishnamurthy sir has told. But it is more true insofar as science, not so much to the jewelry shop. But if you look from that point of view, then there must be something which is very fundamental, which is necessary for science communicators to reflect about when we consider science. Now, what is it that Anirban Ray Chowdhury was pointing out about this difference in the background in different cultures, which makes the different consequences in the world? See, at the end of the day, whatever may be the laboratory output, whatever may be the experimental designs, etc., the scientists would do, one of the most simple thing that is required is that science is basically the game of theories. Now, in the absence of scientific theories, it's very difficult to pursue science. In fact, it cannot be recognized as science if there is absence of theory. So one of the most central characteristic feature is that science is determined by large number of theories, and these theories transform our life. To give you an example, this kind of looking at science actually changes your perspective. For example, as a child, if you look at it, now you're walking outside your house and you are encountering, let's say, a plant, or let's say you're looking at a bunch of leaves that are presented in front of you. Now, why is the leaf green? The question comes. Now, there could be any number of answers that one could offer to why the leaf is green. And these answers could be, Kendra Devar Madidanappa angide, annodrinda, to any number of answers that is available, I don't know, to that kind of an answer. But suddenly at some point in time, you understand chlorophyll and its function. Once you start understand and looking at chlorophyll and associated functions in biology, a cluster of ideas associated with it, suddenly you realize, oh, this is precisely why the leaf is green. And suddenly, your experience, the leaf will continue to be green before knowing these ideas and after knowing these ideas. But your way to appreciate and look at a particular leaf changes because science fundamentally transforms your thinking and making sense of things that are presented in front of you. Now, this kind of transformational effect comes because there are a lot of background ideas that are necessary. In our schooling, when we learn biology, when we study botany, zoology, or any of this, from our early studies, we have been introduced to these concepts one after the other. There is a method in which we have been introduced to study, what are the fundamental elements of botany. At some point in time, you are taught to write a floral diagram, and you would know how to write what components of the flower, what are roots, what are stems, what are nodes. All these kind of ideas have been introduced at different phases of your life, and you have been told how to look at a plant in a particular way. In other words, science actually gives you a particular kind of orientation and a particular kind of concept clusters, a range of ideas within which any phenomena you bring it and put it inside that, and you suddenly start making sense of large number of the phenomena that you encounter in the world. Now, whether you take, why do you breathe like this? Why should you, how should you eat? What should constitute a good kind of a diet, etc. I mean, a range of things of your daily life and ordinary life can be transformed if you start making sense of this background idea. And one of the very important points that Anirban Rai Chaudhary was pointing to us is that in Europe and America, there is a natural tendency that because of their 300 years of struggle that they had, there was an extraordinary struggle that science has to build in its growth. So large number of this conceptual development in science and necessary elements to understand in science have become common sense in the public. Now, however dumb, however brilliant somebody is in the European context, it appears that these ideas have become the most ordinary common sense issue. Because they are part of their ordinary common sense, now they very easily connect to the kind of outputs that come from the laboratories and science. That's why you have brilliant scholars, the top scholars, be it Richard Dawkins to Steve Pinker to any number of people, who were themselves are great scientists, etc., also engage in lot of public conversations. These public conversations really make huge alteration to the life of people. The question that Anirban Rai was asking, whether somebody is a scientist or not, but there is some kind of a fundamental difficulty that in India, such kind of a common sense to articulate some of these conditions, intellectual conditions to send the ideas of science have not been well established. And this gets complicated precisely because, one, these are not part of the common sense of the public, number one. And number two, most importantly, India also has multiple languages. There is also huge linguistic differences which are also available. So you need to cater to the demands of the public. One side, you have a challenge as a science communicator. You have an extraordinary challenge of putting all these ideas in a language in which they can make sense, as Krishnamurthy sir was pointing out, whether one should get vaccinated or not. Is vaccine creating a danger to your life or not? I mean, these are the questions for which the people who are science communicators had to spend enormous amount of time, but they have an additional responsibility within which they have to really talk about science. Now in Europe, because these developed with the institutions, which, see, any institution of scientific excellence in Europe are centuries old. You take most ordinary institution, even in the remotest corner of the Europe, and you have their history running from 14th century, 15th century, etc. And there is a particular kind of struggle that Europe went through in order to establish science. Their trajectory is very different. For instance, I don't know how many of you have heard the Royal Asiatic Society, Royal Society. There are very famous journals which come from that, Proceedings of Royal Academy of Sciences. Have you heard of it? How many of you are aware of Royal Academy of Sciences? So, if you are not know, these are most prestigious Academy of Sciences. In Royal Academy of Sciences, if you look at in the 16th century, if you look at the kind of, so they used to give fellowship to people. So being fellow of Royal Academy of Sciences even today is considered to be a very honorable or a very distinguishing kind of a position that one would have. To be a fellow in Royal Academy of Sciences, now they used to give a citation certificate, that if someone is chosen. And one of the, if you look at the 16th century, 17th century certifications of Royal Academy of Sciences, that you are honored as a fellow because you had shown the brevity and courage to be curious. Now the science emerged at a point in time in Europe where it was even forbidden to be curious about many things in this world. To be curious is to be unholy. in this world because of the religious context within which the science was struggling and trying to emerge there. Science itself emerged as a part within the milieu of the Christian theological reflection, and then science broke away, fought against the clutches of the religion in Europe. But the moment you come to India, there is something very peculiar, and I wanted to tell you this story. A large number of us, when we studied high school, college, etc., we think that the trajectory of the growth of science in India is also religion sort of subjugating the science, etc. And it is as powerful that religion controls the science, and there is some kind of an enmity between the religion and the science in India also. Therefore, we need to develop a reform movement against the religion in order to bring the greatness of the science, etc., etc. In one of the meetings, one of my friends told me, in 80s when they were into a lot of science communication business, when they were trying to communicate people, so one of the science activists, was a very seriously involved activist in South Canara. Apparently, he had gone, before taking his mother when she was ill, gone to the temple. And he did some puja in the temple, and then he went to the hospital to meet the doctor. Now, so there was a lot of, discussion about he going to the temple and doing puja and then going to scientific institution. Now, after all the discussion, I will cut the story short. Yeah, I went to temple, but I went to doctor. I know for this disease, the doctor is the one who can give an injection and, this can be solved. Now, how do we look at it is not my point of discussion here. But there is a different kind of an attitude at ease with people move here. One side, for a person like him, he was also quite learned, he was an activist, who was interested in bringing social transformation. It was not a problem for him to go to temple as well as go to the hospital together. The point that I was trying to communicate is the kind of context and the kind of resistance that the science suffered in the context within which it emerged in European landscape is simply absent, in at least to a majority extent. I'm not saying it's completely absent, but to majority extent, people can move between this. This is what A.K. Ramanujan, when he looked at his father, he writes a very brilliant essay, Is There an Indian Way of Thinking? While writing this essay, one of the problems that he appears is his father appeared very inconsistent to him. His father appeared inconsistent to him because he was coming and practicing astrology at home, but he was actually doing practice in Eurogist College or somewhere in Mysore. And he was doing all that puja, rituals, etc. at home, and he was behaving like a completely modern person in the thing. For Ramanujan, it appears that he lived two lives. His father lived like two lives. It appears completely inconsistent to him because he was in Chicago and then he was thinking there. And for Ramanujan's father, this was not a contradiction. He was easily moving between these two. Therefore, one of the situations that we must recognize is that the way Europe's journey in establishing science as a culture in their societies, a research culture in their societies, was a matter of their extraordinary struggle, an extraordinary fight, because the people had to sacrifice their life. They got killed, literally. People were burnt. They were jailed. They were imprisoned. But there, they were completely opposite of each other. But here, people could move. So when we have to communicate science in India, now we must realize that this is the society within which we are telling the stories of science. Now, when we tell, for example, if you take Scientific American, for example, or Bioscience, these kind of popular science journal as a model to communicate science, various scientific reports, there are a large number of blogs today that are available. If you look at those kind of blogs, those kind of scientific report writing, etc. Now, and if you want to emulate those and write to Indian audience, a large number of science writers have told me that their storytelling have not been efficiently communicating the science that they wanted to communicate. They have been very hardworking. They have been very seriously thinking. They have been doing a lot of homework that is necessary. But there is some problem in whatever they do. Many of them have changed their styles of writing, etc. And yet their ability to reach out to people and make science draw attention and bringing some kind of a transformation in thinking is something is not happening. For which the Anirban Roy Chowdhury's reflection gives us a point that there is some kind of a task that is required for us to be thought of, when we intend to do any kind of science communication. Now, what is the nature of the task is what I am going to sketch for a few minutes, and then probably we will keep this as a broader conversation. I will touch upon few issues and then bring it to some kind of a logical end, then we can take it further. See, one of the important thing that if you, whenever you wanted to write something about science, when we have to talk about it, think of, I don't know how many of you have studied in your mother tongues? How many in this room have studied, not the seniors, of course, seniors are of my type, all of you have studied in mother tongue. Younger generation, English. Okay. So a lot of you have not studied in Kannada mediums, at least for sure. So that much I am convinced now. Now, if you have not studied, see, one of the striking thing that the science education in India brings is that we don't know the kind of science that we learn, the way that I gave you the example of leaf, how our experience of leaf being green is transformed with the availability of the scientific knowledge. We don't know how to relate our science to our lives. For some reason, for example, there is something peculiar. I will give you an example. I'm sure all of you would have done it. So in mobile, large number of you have this habit of playing games. Don't you? I'm sure all of you play some game or the other. Okay? But there are some people who are smarter amongst you who would want to play scientific games. Have you heard of it? There are a lot of people who download. There are sites which offers you scientific games. Now think of this usage. And we all Indians, India and China has the highest market for the scientific games. Okay, what are the scientific games? Now it will make you logically think, it will give you some kind of reasoning ability, etc., etc. But tell me, take the worst possible example. The Candy Crush, right? The most famous example that your generation people would keep playing all the time. Do you think it's an unscientific game? If you have to clear one level and go to the next level, you have to use your reason. There is a logic to the game. And it is built on certain kind of programming. Programming has certain rationale. Now, the very peculiar idea, a large number of science graduates that I know, my friends, they wanted to buy for their children the scientific games. How come some game is scientific and some game is non-scientific? Now, any game has to be based on some kind of rational considerations. You could say some game would require you to apply your memory, for instance. Some games might require your, comprehension. Some game might require you to use your analytical skills. Blah, blah, blah. You can make that. Those are fine. For example, there are any number of people who would play games like Sudoku, in their mobiles. Sudoku is obviously playing with numbers. A particular sequencing of numbers that you would engage in. All these games, nonetheless, if you are using these games in the smartphone, what does it mean to talk about scientific games and unscientific games? Now the question is, why would we talk this way? So when my European friends come and spend time with me at my place, they would laugh at this kind of vocabulary that is used by Indians. Now, they would laugh is fine, but I was trying to find out why is that we speak this way, right? Now, one of the very important aspects that you realize is that the concepts that we use in science, the way we talk about science, it appears that that is a separate world as opposed to the way that I live is a different world. Now, why is that it is not part of my life to be rational in this way as opposed to this way? Why is that these two are not one and the same in my life? Now, why is that our ways of thinking, no matter, there are extraordinary science teachers. I will tell you my commitment to biological sciences, the way I was drawn into biology, leaving, engineering sciences. And I mean, I wanted to really pursue biology because of my teachers. They're fascinating teachers. And if someone says that we have bad teachers, etc., I mean, they could be bad teachers. I'm not denying that fact. But there are science teachers who have been wonderfully passionate teachers. That is what is my experience, whether you go to the remotest of the village, etc. Yet, we are unable to bring this connection to a particular kind of thinking which science asks us to our life. So one of the tasks is that we make these ideas, which are very fundamental to the growth of scientific knowledge, or to develop an attitude of reflection, thinking, common sense in our world. It should become part of our day-to-day conversation. It should become part of not simply saying science has some kind of a great abstract value, but it has something which has a deeper impact on my life. Now, in order to make these background ideas, history, sociology, etc., of the science, has to be somehow communicated in a way that Indians are good at storytelling. We are the best storytellers in the world. You know, you in our daily life, you ask any question, you will never get a straightforward answer. You will get a story. Did you have a lunch? ಏನಾಯ್ತು ಗೊತ್ತಾ ಮಧ್ಯಾಹ್ನ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗಿದ್ದೆ, the story begins. Now, we are very good storyteller. And if you could bring the stories of making science intelligible to our daily life, how do we make? So it requires not just retelling of some history of science and, in Kannada or in English or anything else. It requires us to develop conceptual vocabularies, a set of ideas which actually, from the early part of my life, transform our experiences. It generates a particular way of looking at this world. I think the challenge of science communication, the ways of communicating to Indian audience, the word ways that I used, is that we don't know what and all is necessary today in order to make the background ideas on which science can function. See, if you want to do a scientific research, let's say you're a physicist, you need to have basic background understanding of a range of theories, be it quantum physics or mechanics or whatever you're doing. Same is the case with biology. In that way, even in our ordinary life, we need to have a richer stories about our world in such a way that the ideas of science becomes common sense, part of our life. This is not a task of 5 years or 10 years. This is a task, I think, a large number of us had to engage and bring it in multiple Indian languages for next few decades. If we start doing it, the next generation with the flood of information technology, etc., and we can aid this process in making a particular way of thinking, particular way of looking at our lives and the world in order to make a better case of life. Because we know today, whether we like whatever may be criticism of science, we know science is the best form of knowledge. And last 300 years of the experience of natural sciences tells us that science is used in the sense of best form of knowledge. And in order to make this best form of knowledge that is available, we need to create a background. And for that, I wanted to end by pointing out our traditions have told us. For example, I'm sure you must have heard Shishnal Sharif. In one of his poetry, there is an interesting line. ತರವಲ್ಲ ತಾಗಿ ನಿನ್ನ ತಂಬೂರಿ ಸ್ವರ ಬರದೆ ಬಾರಿಸದಿರು ತಂಬೂರಿ ಸರಸ ಸಂಗೀತದ ಕುರುಹುಗಳರಿಯದೆ ಬರದೆ ಬಾರಿಸದಿರು ತಂಬೂರಿ. ತಂಬೂರಿ ಬಾರಿಸಬೇಕು ಅಂದರೆ ಸರಸ ಸಂಗೀತದ ಕುರುಹುಗಳಿರಬೇಕು. So, therefore, that signpost that Shishnal Sharif was pointing out is exactly the signpost that science is also required. There are scientists who do wonderful job. They produce knowledge. There are technology. Everything comes. How do we make best use of it? How do we transform our life, in reorienting in a particular kind of thinking that is demanded? It is called a cognitive enterprise. That's why it's called cognitive enterprise. If that has to happen, I think as science communicators, we need to create a background condition. That background condition requires dealing with how do we negotiate and deal with different contexts within ordinary lives lived. And I have sketched some of these issues. There are a range of issues that I wanted to point out. And whenever we find occasion about translations, the problem of translating signs, etc., is something that I will not go into. I think all of you are tired. With this, I will stop here. And if there are any questions, we will take it and take it further.
ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಮಧ್ಯಾಹ್ನದ ಮೊದಲನೇ ಸೆಷನ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಎಚ್ ಆರ್ ಕೃಷ್ಣಮೂರ್ತಿ ಮತ್ತು ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಎಸ್ ಚೈತ್ರ ಅವರು ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಆಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟಲ್ಲಿ ದ ಚಾಲೆಂಜಸ್, ಹೊಸ ಚಾಲೆಂಜಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಹೊಸ ಚಾಲೆಂಜಸ್ ಏನೇನಿದೆ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಜರ್ನಲಿಸಮಲ್ಲಿ ಅದರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ತೊಗೊಂಡ್ರೆ, ಸೆಕೆಂಡ್ ಲೆಕ್ಚರಲ್ಲಿ ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಆಡಿಯನ್ಸ್ಗೆ ಹೇಗೆ ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಕೇಟ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ಹೇಳ್ತಾಯಿದ್ರು. ಎರಡೂ ಲೆಕ್ಚರನ್ನು ಕೇಳಿದ ಮೇಲೆ ಈಗಾಗಲೇ ಇನ್ನೂ ಒಂದು ಸೆಷನ್ ಇರೋದರಿಂದ ತುಂಬ ಕ್ರಿಸ್ಪಾಗಿ ಮತ್ತು ಬ್ರೀಫಾಗಿ ಹೇಳೋದಾದರೆ, ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಈಸ್ ಆ್ಯನ್ ಆಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಎಂಟರ್ಪ್ರೈಸ್. Science is per se it is objective, but science communication could be subjective based on different audience. That's what M.S. Chaitra has illustrated throughout his lecture. So I was remembering music. Music per se is 100% science, whether it is Shruti, Laya, Tala or Raga. It is 100% science. But how do I sing a song is creativity of the musician. Either he is a vocalist or is an instrumentalist. So similarly, exactly is the science journalism. On one side you have the objectivity, on other side you have the subjectivity. So retaining objectivity, how do you communicate science, is the gist of the entire science communication. Today you heard swaras, that is the elements has been picked up. In coming days, so all the swara prastaras will be discussed in all the different sessions. So I wish you all the best for all the next 3 days program. But for today's both the first and the second session, so it was very well rehearsed and very well presented lectures. So they had worked a lot in order to give you a glimpse of how some science communication has to be, how the challenges, how you have to filter the news, how you have to deliver. When it comes to Indian community, why Indian community has to be delivered in a separate way. So it is a little bit debatable according to me, but I will not take up the debate now. But that aspect can be examined. So I thank Professor H R Krishnamurthy sir and Mr. M.S. Chaitra sir on behalf of all of us here, and also on behalf of Kuvempu Bhasha Bharati. Okay? The entire program has been partially sponsored by Kuvempu Bhasha Bharati, but for them this program would have not happened. So I thank Kuvempu Bhasha Bharati and also all of you here. So we are now breaking for a tea session, and we have one more session. The attendance looks good. Please do participate. At the end of 3 days, definitely you will be benefited. ಈ ಥರದ ವರ್ಕ್ಶಾಪ್ಸ್ ಆಗೋದು ತುಂಬ ಅಪರೂಪ. ಅದು ಕರ್ನಾಟಕದ ಮಟ್ಟಕ್ಕೆ ಇಂಥ ಒಂದು ವರ್ಕ್ಶಾಪ್ಸ್ ತುಂಬ ಅಪರೂಪ. ಡೆಲ್ಲಿಯಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲೋ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ, ಕಲ್ಕತ್ತಾದಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲೋ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ, ಹೊರಗಡೆ ತುಂಬ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಆದ್ದರಿಂದ 3 ದಿವಸ ಕಷ್ಟ ಆದರೂ ಪರವಾಗಿಲ್ಲ, ಕಷ್ಟಪಟ್ಟರೆ ಮತ್ತೆ ಕಲಿಯೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ. ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಪಾರ್ಟಿಸಿಪೇಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ. ವಿ ನೌ adjourn. If there are no questions, we will adjourn for tea. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for chairing the session smoothly and making this program effective with your valuable inputs. There will be a 15 minutes tea break arranged in HNK for everyone.
There's a small announcement that should be made by Altaf sir. Please wait for 5 minutes.
Okay, yes. So after tea, please do come back. This 3-day workshop also includes the participant competitions. Okay, you will have to make your own videos or articles, for which we have kept a huge cash prize aside to give it out to the participants. Cash prize close to 30,000 rupees overall. So I hope the participation will be overwhelming. So please do come back, and we will discuss the rules and all the, what all participants have to do and what kinds of presentations you can make. Okay, so we'll announce it after the tea break. See you after 15 minutes. Thanks.
ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿ ಜರ್ನಲಿಸಮ್ ಸ್ಟೂಡೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಎಷ್ಟು ಜನ ಬಂದಿದ್ದೀರಿ? ಪ್ಲೀಸ್ ರೈಸ್ ಯುವರ್ ಹ್ಯಾಂಡ್. ಸೊ quite a good number. They are the postgraduate students of journalism. Professor B K Ravi has sent. ಅವರು ಬರ್ತೀನಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದರು, ಇವತ್ತು ಘಟಿಕೋತ್ಸವ ಇರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಬರೋಕ್ಕಾಗಿಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಅದರ್ ದ್ಯಾನ್ ನ್ಯಾಷನಲ್ ಕಾಲೇಜ್ ಎಷ್ಟು ಜನ ಇದ್ದೀರಿ? ದಟ್ಸ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಗುಡ್ ನಂಬರ್. ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಅದರ್ ದ್ಯಾನ್ ನ್ಯಾಷನಲ್ ಕಾಲೇಜ್ ಆಯಿತು. ನ್ಯಾಷನಲ್ ಕಾಲೇಜ್ ಅವರು? ದಟ್ಸ್ ಓಕೆ. ಓಕೆ, ಇವ್ರು ಹೇಳ್ದಂಗೆ ಅದ್ಭುತವಾದ ಪ್ರೈಸ್ಗಳಿದೆ. ಅಮೌಂಟ್ ಹೇಳ್ದಪ್ಪ? ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಟ್ರೂ. ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಪ್ರೈಸ್ ಎಷ್ಟು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದೀಯಾ? ಓಕೆ,
ಅದು
ಜೂರಿ ಡಿಸೈಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಪ್ರೈಸ್ ಇದೆ. 3 ದಿವಸದಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂಚೂರು ಸಂಪಾದನೆನೂ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು, ಪ್ರೊವೈಡೆಡ್ ಯು ಡೂ ವೆಲ್.
outside, just here.